you ready to revolutionize your relationship with money? Welcome to the Finding Financial Freedom podcast with the Frugal Physician, where I, Dr. Disha Spath, will be your companion on this exciting adventure. Get ready to conquer debt, build wealth, and embrace a mindful spending lifestyle that will empower you to live life on your own terms. Pearson Ravitz' story begins with Dr. Stephanie Pearson, a passionate OB-GYN at the height of her career. But then, a shoulder injury struck during a precipitous delivery. Her dreams were shattered, leaving her unable to practice medicine. Determined to make a difference, Stephanie became an advocate for her peers, guiding them through the complex disability process. Alongside insurance expert Scott Ravitz, Stephanie founded Pearson Ravitz, a company determined to approach insurance differently. Together, they set their mission to educate and empower physicians to protect their most valuable asset, their income, and the most important people in their life, their family. Today, Pearson Ravitz serves the medical community in all 50 states. At Pearson Ravitz, they understand the unique concerns of physicians. Physician-founded and physician-focused, Pearson Ravitz builds human connections before they create quotes. Life can change in an instant. It's hard to imagine that a sudden illness or injury could leave you and your family in a devastating financial situation. But with a little planning and guidance, you can prepare for every possibility. Visit PearsonRavitz.com to schedule your consultation with a Pearson Ravitz advisor. Hello there, and welcome to Finding Financial Freedom with the Frugal Physician, the podcast where we delve into the world of finance, career, and life balance in the medical field. I'm your host, Dr. Disha Spath, and today we have a wonderful episode lined up for you. We're going to explore a topic that's crucial for every physician: contracts and compensation. But before we get into it, let me introduce our distinguished guest for today's episode. Joining us is Jon Appino, the CEO of Contract Diagnostics, a nationwide consulting company that specializes 100% in physician contract review. Jon's dedication to educating physicians in the non-clinical aspect of medicine aligns perfectly with our mission here. Welcome, Jon.
Thanks so much. It's good to see you, good to catch up, and I'm looking forward to the discussion. I don't know about the word distinguished and CEO. I work at Contract Diagnostics. I've worked here for a long, long time. Every time I see my LinkedIn profile and it says, worked here for so many years and months, I'm surprised. As they say, time flies. So I'm looking forward to spending some time today.
Yeah, you've been in this field for a long time and a supporter of the Frugal Physician for a long time, so thank you. You've helped me with my contract, so I'm really excited to get your insights into the whole process and introduce you to our audience. Do you mind telling us a little bit about your background and how you got into all of this in the first place?
I always had that little bit of entrepreneurial spirit, drive, motivation, whatever the right word is. I started a car stereo shop with a friend when I was in high school at 17. When I was in college, I was selling protein powder and creatine and supplements out of my dorm room. This was back, when you could put your credit card into this thing called the internet. And I actually was one that would trust the internet with my credit card. And I worked out a deal with an owner of a company called DPS Nutrition. I think they're still up and going. And I had minimum orders every month and I got free shipping. And the interesting thing, Dish, is I did both the car stereo shop and the supplement company not to make money. I did it because there was, I thought, a need and there was a way that I could help people. And I loved to talk about car stereos in high school and still am into fitness and nutrition in college. And if I could find a way to get my protein powder and my creatine for free by selling a couple and helping out some other people, I thought it was fun. So I started both companies, again, just looking at a market need and how I could help people, not because I wanted to grow and scale the companies and make all this money. And then after college, I was a pre-medical major, biology, zoology, and microbiology in college. And I decided I didn't want to go to medical school after my mother, who was a nurse practitioner. A lot of her colleagues, physician colleagues, had said, Jon, don't go into medicine. The government's controlling everything. You should go into computers. So 2001. So think of what they would say these days, right? After all the changes that have happened in the last 20 some years. I wanted to be an emergency medicine physician. I thought that would just be a lot of fun. I decided against it. So I went into work in the pharmaceutical industry and I had a lot of different roles from marketing and sales. I worked with a lot of physicians all over the country in many different frames. And I learned the business side, if you will, of medicine. And since I had a lot of physician friends, I would always ask them, because I still had my entrepreneurial, kind of spirit. And I would always ask them, what are the things that upset you or that frustrate you? They all gave me the similar, number of things where, we make a lot of money. We don't know what to do with it. Physicians are pretty typically terrible at finance. We get too many calls from recruiters and they're annoying, and the salesmen on this and on that. And it was just a lot of the same thing. So I thought actually I was going to reinvent the entire transition from being a resident or fellow into an attending. Everything from, how you find a house, to your contract, to recruiting and finding your job, to how you manage your money, and everything in between. And I realized that you can't do everything really, really well. And it's better to focus on just one thing and do it really, really well. And I really enjoyed the contract piece. I loved the education around it. I liked the transactional nature, the physician recruiting space, the real estate space. A lot of those are very challenging because you could work with a client anyways for weeks or months and months and make no money. And I like the transactional process. I have, a call with somebody today. I get to hop on the phone, help them, and I have satisfaction that day because I got to help somebody and they paid money. Versus like, I'm going to work for weeks at a time and maybe they won't transact anything. And it's just kind of a lost cause. So I felt really good about the contract space. There was really no solution as far as like a national company. One of my friends who is a hematology and oncologist who just finished training, he said, I had my contract looked at by one local lawyer. He said, yeah, they told me it was fine. And I said, what else? I gave him $400 or something. And he said, it looked okay. He talked with me for 12 minutes and that was it. And I said, what about the compensation? He had an RVU structure, and I don't recall what it was, but he said, I'm paid this much per year, and my RVU structure is whatever, $62 per RVU. Is that good or bad? And the lawyer said, I don't know. I'm a lawyer, not a compensation guru. And so I thought there has to be a better way. He didn't know what he signed. He was just told it's, quote, fine. He didn't know how he should ask for what because he never was told what to ask for. And he didn't even get any advice around his compensation or any advice around his benefits. So I thought there'd be a better way to help people and kind of get back to my core on doing something on my own. So we started Contract Diagnostics, and the company's changed so much over the years. But the one thing that has remained at its core is all we do are contract reviews and compensation analysis. So we have a great team here that's changed over the years. But what we don't do, we don't sell data. We don't promote other things. We don't have links on our website to sell your data to a vendor for disability or for life insurance or, recruiters or anything like that. We just do contract reviews. And because of that, we've got great internal data, which is really, really amazing to share with physicians. That's real time. Also, we have a great time on not only helping physicians understand their contracts, negotiate and know what's typical and what's not, but also educating. I know, you guys love to do what you do as far as education around finance. And we have a director of education here, Dr. Catherine, a physician whose sole task is not to make money for the company, but to educate physicians. We have really great blog writing. We have lots of things up on social as far as YouTube and educational videos and podcasts. We give lectures 3-4 times a year just internally with hundreds of people. They're non-promotional, all education. We give, countless talks at residency programs around the country, all non-promotional, all fairly unbranded. And we do it because we love to give back and we love to teach. So that's kind of a brief snapshot on Contract Diagnostics. And over 13 years, we touch thousands and thousands of physicians a year and review thousands of contracts a year. And we really have a fun time doing it, believe it or not.
Yeah, contracts are complicated and there's a lot hidden in there, especially for young physicians that haven't looked at it. Their first contract can be somewhat intimidating. What is it exactly? Can you walk us through what your contract review entails and how it benefits the physician?
First, we know kind of what's standard terms. Just what are the standard terms in a contract, from what's typical for language around benefits, what's typical for language around the schedule, what's typical for a non-compete in certain markets or for malpractice insurance. We know how to find the small little words that may or may not change the meaning of something. What we don't do, we don't interpret contracts. We say, look, this is very clear and this is not clear. This is standard. This is something that we don't usually see. This is something that maybe the physician doesn't care about based on their story, which I'm sure we'll get to later on. And this is something that based on your story, you really should care about. And then we can guide them and coach them on who to talk with at the facility and how to ask the questions. And you can imagine how you ask is really important, whether you're, maybe a pediatrician that's shy and doesn't want to ask for a lot, or you're a surgeon that wants to ask for everything. And kind of how do you take and frame that in a way to provide the most chance for success based on the request that you're making. our process is kind of holistic, if you will, because we are able to say, like, this is typical and not typical. Here's what you could ask for and how you could based on your story. And then, of course, we've got great compensation data. And we spend a lot of our time reviewing the compensation structure, making sure it's clear, making sure it's clean, and then, of course, advising the physician on how they can best negotiate or possibly change it.
You mentioned non-competes. Word on the street is that they won't hold up in court, and we're trying to get rid of them. And generally, these days, I pretty much refuse to sign one because I think it's just gratuitous. But tell us a little bit about your experience with non-competes and how they might differ in different states.
Again, all states have nuances, and I think it's important for everybody to know what's going on in their particular state. There's a lot of changes right now. Trump announced a couple of years ago something. Biden's taken it to a different level. The FTC was evaluating everything. We've seen some states already make changes. At the end of the day, are they enforceable or are they not? We say, look, it's in the contract, and we advise all of our clients, of course, to not break contracts. How will you know if it's enforceable or not? Well, sometimes you have to go to court to find out. And that's not something that we typically want the physician to go through. So we would advise a physician based on what the non-compete says that's clear or not clear on what's typical in that particular market that we see. And maybe if they say, look, we're not going to take out the non-compete, maybe we'll be able to provide some advice to the physician on how they could ask for maybe a couple of concessions. So maybe it's not a binary, it's in, it's out. Maybe it's in, but there's some asterisks there on how they could have it changed. So it might not be enforceable in certain situations. Or maybe they request a buyout provision where they can buy their freedom, if you will. We always think it's important for the physician to talk to the account and ask them, hey, does everyone have a non-compete? Does it vary by specialty? So if you're working for a large system, is it different for hospitalists versus surgeons or anybody else? I do think it's important to ask, has anybody violated a non-compete? And if so, what did the facility do? I think those are all very, very important questions that every physician should ask before signing a contract with a non-compete. And I will say some physicians don't think it matters because they'll say, look, I'll deal with it later on. There's a lot of transient physicians anymore where they're saying, look, I'm going to sign here and then who knows in 3 years. If I don't like it, I'll just leave, I'll move. So maybe the non-compete's not a particular important thing for you. But if you've got family in the area and maybe there's a competing hospital you could see yourself at, I think it's definitely important to understand how the contracts work.
Absolutely. I mean, picking up a family and moving is a pretty dramatic and terrible thing for most families to do. And patients in the area appreciate continuity. It can hurt patient care, when people are moving around. So I think it's very important that we look at non-competes carefully and make sure we understand what they might implicate if we decide to leave.
One of the reasons that we take our role so serious here, we know that it's not a good thing for a physician to transition, for a facility to have to rehire. It's hyper expensive for them. For a patient to have their physician here one day and gone the next. For a community to have a certain service available and then not available because the physician who offers that one procedure, that one option leaves the community. So we don't think that's in anybody's best interest. And one could argue it's in our best interest if a physician changes jobs every other year because they'll call us back and they'll give us more money and have us another contract review. Although that may sound good on the surface, we look at our job as the opposite. We want the physician to understand everything and make sure it's very clear so they can stay there as long as they want. And hopefully that's forever if that's what the physician says their goal is. So we look at our job very seriously, and we love nothing more than when we get a message from a physician, 3 years later saying, John, or fill in the blank, who, Jillian or Pete or Selena or Anu or whomever, thank you so much for your help. This has been a great process. The last 3 years have been wonderful, and I'm coming up on renewal. We love those emails. It gives us a lot of joy when a physician finds a great home. And part of it's because of the questions that we help them ask during their due diligence process.
I actually saw on your website that you do renewal compensation reviews as well. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
I'm so excited about it's called Compensation RX. And we have really good compensation data. It's real time. And we also have other, obviously, big national surveys that we have that we can share with physicians. But what we do, it's one thing to go on a search or even to have data that says, I'm a cardiologist in Chicago. What's average? Well, X dollars. And if you're higher or lower, it's good or bad. I don't think that just the number is worth it. And from a cardiology perspective, I guess I'll use the example of my cholesterol. If I say my LDL cholesterol is 100 or 90, is it good or bad? And it's hard to just look at a number. I'm assuming any physician would say, well, is the patient male or female? Are they 30 years old or are they 75 years old? Do they have a family history or do they not? Do they smoke? Do they have diabetes? Are they active? What's their diet like? I think they would ask a lot of questions before they said, without pause, this number is good or bad. Unless, of course, it's something crazy, 400 or something, then I think it'd be bad no matter what. But I think with compensation, it's the same. So we not only give the physician numbers as far as here's what average RVUs look like. Here's what average compensation looks like in 95th percentile and the 10th percentile. Here's what we're seeing for vacation and time off, all these other parameters. But we also talk with them and we hear their story. And we firmly believe that the story matters here at Contract Diagnostics, which is why we have 15-minute free inquiry calls on our website that anybody can sign up for to tell us your story and see if we can help you with anything. But when we do a compensation RX call, we give them the data, but we also do the call with them. To use numbers, you're making $500,000 in a year as a surgeon, and you're taking call 10 days or taking call 3 days in a month. It matters, and that's not reflective in the data. So we take all the knowledge that the physician gives us, and we kind of customize the approach back. They've been in the community for 10 years, or they've only been there for a year. They've lost a lot of physicians, and that physician covered for everyone else for no charge while they were down staff, so they didn't have to hire locums at $3,500 a day. Or the physician's one of 10 and they're all treated identically the same and they haven't had a negotiation for the group. We hear their story, look at their volume, look at their production, and then we customize the approach back. And it's been super successful. They're so fun for us. And every physician I talk to says we should charge 3 or 4 times what we charge. But again, it's not about money. It's about helping physicians. And they're so much fun for us to do them. We're honored to do them. So that's Compensation RX. And I honestly feel, I know you're going to think I'm crazy, but I honestly think that a third or 40% of all physicians should have this product once every second or third year. So it's a lot. We don't have that many people who do that many calls here, but I really think that this is a cheap, inexpensive tool. Just like someone gets their oil changed or their cholesterol checked or a physical done or their tires rotated, I think you should have your compensation taken a look at by an expert and have a conversation around it because it's not something easily talked about. And that's what Compensation RX is meant to do. And I feel everybody should invest under $300 in this product every second or third year. It's really fun.
What was the price point again for this review?
It's less than $300. I think it's $297. And we don't review contracts. We hear the physician's story, we share the compensation data, and then we customize an approach and give them recommendations back with, how to approach, who to approach. And then here are some of the things based on what they told us that you could potentially ask and negotiate or request. It's tons of fun. And then some physicians say, John, I don't want to do this. Can you just do it for me? And we have that ability, of course, where we can call the facility and do the discussion on the physician's behalf. And we've been very successful at that as well. I love getting those emails from physicians. John, thank you for the data and the recommendations. I had a conversation and here's what they offered. And we've seen some really, really good bonus increases, retention signings, changes to compensation structures, changes in time off benefits, and lots of other things.
So if you do the process for them, is there a higher charge or is it still the same price point?
It's pretty laborious because, of course, we look at the contract from start to finish. And so we put them into our negotiation package, $1,900, which still is a very reasonable price point when we're going through everything and talking to the employer on your wishes, your wants. We're doing the due diligence. We're talking about what's all going to change. If there's an issue with the schedule or with staffing, or you need a new ultrasound machine that they haven't invested in. And of course, lots on compensation. We do all of that for you and allow the physician to do what they do best. The other thing that we are successful is a lot of physicians, I say raise your hand every 2 to 3 years and talk about your compensation with your employer. And a lot of physicians, I think, do. And the employer tends to boot the decision or punt the decision. Oh, we'll get to that in a month. We'll get to that in 3 months. And sometimes people just call us and they say, they've been intentionally delaying me and delaying this conversation for 6 months. So can you just call them up and make it happen? It seems like when we message them, they're excited to work with us, number one, but they take it seriously and they move the process forward much faster. Especially
when you have your lawyer call, I'm sure it makes it a lot different than an email from the employee. But I can imagine $1,900 investment really paying off in paying for itself in the process.
We did a family practice sports physician, I think it was just last year. Again, he'd been there for 7 years, hadn't had a bump. He was the first family medicine sports physician, and now there was 3 other people. And he didn't know, but he had a feeling that the others had started higher than he did. than he was at currently. He was producing off the charts. And we ended up calling the facility after we, back and forth, and we set up a call and everything. I went over the numbers of the physician with the administrator, and he had no idea. He said, Jon, I didn't even know he was doing this. Let me go back and see what I can do. We had a proposal. We went back and forth, and we got him a $70,000 increase in guaranteed salary per year with no more requirement to do more RVUs and an extra week of vacation. And it was a 3-year term, guaranteed. So over 3 years, $210,000 in new cash and 3 weeks to do anything he wants with his family or his passions or his hobbies. And those are the stories that, number one, I love. This sounds strange. I also cringe a little bit because at the end he says, Jon, I'm so happy. I hope you're thrilled too. And I said, I'm thrilled, but I'm also sad. And I'm sad because I wish that you would have called us 3 years ago, because it went on for 7 years, Disha, and he didn't have any increases in pay. And I put it on myself. We didn't shoot enough social media content, or we didn't write the right blog, or we didn't have the right message to him somewhere to hear about us, to call us. And I'm super thrilled with the results on all of these, especially his. But I'm also sad that there's all these people out there and they don't know about us, or they don't know about the product, or again, maybe they do without us. It's not about us, but that they aren't raising their hand, having that conversation. And we tell physicians all the time, there's a big, big difference between making a lot of money and being paid fair. So physicians, they get paid a lot of money, but it doesn't mean that they're paid fairly. And I think that's one thing that a physician should delineate, thinking, well, I make a lot of money, I'm in whatever percent bracket, but that doesn't mean that you're paid fairly. We're based in Kansas City, and so Patrick Mahomes is a heck of a football player, and he makes an awful lot of money. And I said, if Pat Mahomes made $10 million a year to play football, what would you think of that? People say, that's nuts. But $10 million is an awful lot of money to make in a year for playing football. But that would be ridiculous for him because he's worth multiple times that. And I think a physician should look at themselves as in that same situation. Just because you're making a lot doesn't mean that it's fair. And that's what we're here to help with.
I really appreciate that service. And especially, I think women physicians can definitely be helped by this service. And I'm really glad you bring it up. Imagine Dr. Emily, a skilled and passionate physician, standing at a pivotal moment in her career path. She has just received a contract offer and is surrounded by uncertainty. Is the offer fair? Does it align with her career goals? This is where Contract Diagnostics shines. Their nationwide expertise, encompassing every state and specialty, positions them as the go-to ally for physicians. When they dove into Dr. Emily's contract, it wasn't just a review. They demystified complex clauses and provided enlightening insights, tailoring their approach to her specific needs. Regardless of whether you're taking your first steps as a new graduate or navigating as an established doctor, Contract Diagnostics delivers a tailored, comprehensive contract review, perfectly suited to your individual situation. Now, it's your turn to secure your future. Reach out to Contract Diagnostics at 888-574-5526 or visit contractdiagnostics.com. Begin your empowering career journey today, and I'll be cheering for you from the other side. In primary care especially, you brought up that example of the family medicine doctor. We see a lot of people kind of putting in time outside business hours, generally just being given, way more work than is actually achievable in the workday and putting in a lot of after hours, sofa time. How can a physician best approach that situation and give you the best data, I guess, to help negotiate fair compensation for all that uncompensated work?
I think that happens far too often. And I think, which is, again, why the story matters. And I think all that context is very, very important. I think if we go back to an initial contract review on why it's important to have your initial contract reviewed, we always say that contracts are around expectations. I mean, again, if you're buying a home, the expectation is on this day, I'll give you this money and you'll give me the keys to the house, and the windows will be or will not be in, and the refrigerator will or will not be there, and the barbecue in the back and everything else. It's about expectations. So put your expectations down. And if you say, well, you're going to leave the TV, right? And they say, sure, but it's not in the real estate contract, and you show up and that TV's gone, you might be kind of out. And I think a physician contract is the same. It's about expectations. And in the expectations of any employee-employer relationship, or even a contractor, it's, what am I going to do for you? And then what are you going to do for me? So real estate, on this day, I'll leave you my house keys. And on this day, you'll leave me money. And in the physician space, they're going to give you money and benefits and a place to work. So those things should be very clear. How much money are you going to make? What are the benefits you're going to have? And what are the things that they're going to provide to you as far as resources and staffing and equipment? And then what are you going to do for them? You're going to give them your time. And I think that should be very clear as well. And unfortunately, what we see all too often is the compensation is clear. You'll be paid $180,000 plus 30% of any collections over, $400,000, for example, maybe for a primary care or something different. Or RVUs at $42 per each, up to the salary of, $280 or so. What we unfortunately don't see is that level of clarity around the schedule. So we might see something very fluid that says physicians shall work at least 40 hours per week on a schedule built by the employer. And you have no idea what it means. 40 hours of patient care, 40 hours of clinical work, 40 hours during Monday through Friday, 40 hours including call, or there is no call. And it's just so high end, so fluid. And when we look at those sections, we really don't know sometimes if we're working with a primary care physician or a specialist or a surgeon or something else. So I think if we go back to the initial, I think those things should be very, very clear and the expectations set. So 36 patient contact hours per week between the hours of 8 and 5, Monday through Friday only, unless otherwise approved by the physician, is language that we've seen and we think makes sense. Call is or is not required. Call is required up to 7 days per month. Anything over 7 days per month will get the physician's permission. Those are things that are clear that we've seen physicians ask for that we think make a lot of sense. And again, maybe they verbally tell you those things, but they don't put them in the contract and you find yourself 2 years, 3 years down the road and you're working too much. I think that's another reason to raise your hand every other year, not just to go in and talk about compensation, but to talk about all of those things. And if you're working too much, we do feel that employers are more tuned in to language around burnout, around constrictions on your family time, around working too much. We do feel that employers, if you look at all the surveys, they say they're really, really working on it. And I think when they hear it from the front lines of the physicians who produce the results that they're able to report, as far as patient care and revenue, I think they will listen. So I think everything's important to discuss. And I think being one of the physicians that doesn't just kind of sink in and never be heard from again once you sign your initial contract, you're one of them that is raising your hand and reaching out every other year, every third year to say, I want to talk about not just how much money I'm making. I want to talk about, Nurse John and my colleague Betty and, the equipment and, the plans for growing my practice in the future. I think it's important to have those conversations. And I think those conversations just need to be open and honest and totally kind. And if there's compensation that should be, but again, that's where I think having some guidance from us or somebody like us is going to be important, because then we can help frame it as to say, here's what you should be doing based on typical norms. And here's what you should be making for what a typical person would make. Or if you're working too much or too long, here's what that compensation structure should look like. I think going in with that knowledge and that data, and not just kind of winging it to see what they say, I think is really important.
Now, Jon, you've been in this industry for a long time now. I think about 10 years.
I think it's been 13.
Wow. Yeah. So 13 years in the industry. You have probably a lot of longitudinal data on how the industry has changed over time. Can you give us a little insights into the things that you have seen change over time?
Yes, of course. I mean, everyone's seen consolidation. We've seen private equity come into certain spaces. 10 years ago, we saw private equity in dermatology. That was it. And we saw private equity kind of come into ophthalmology. Now we've seen it in orthopedics and gastroenterology and urology. We've seen private equity do big system purchases like Stewart Healthcare a couple of years ago. I just read an article on it today. And they've since exited. A private equity company, they have different goals than maybe a physician owner does, especially if a physician takes a job in a small practice with the goal of partnership or ownership in the future, and that practice sells to private equity, it could change the trajectory of that physician's career and livelihood potentially. So we've seen private equity come into more specialties than we thought, and even larger hospital systems. And when private equity comes into the medical space or any space, obviously there's levers that are pulled from the private equity entity that changes the dynamics of the practice or the physicians that are working there and the staff and the profit and loss and the patients they serve and everything else. We've seen more standardization in terms of physician contracts. Some people would say that's a bad thing. Some people say, are they even negotiable? And sometimes yes, and sometimes no. Even if it's not, I think it's important to understand what it says. But we've seen a lot of standardizations in physician employment contracts. And that doesn't mean just because the contract might be the same for all physicians that you shouldn't understand it. And it doesn't mean that you can't negotiate it. So even standard contracts need to be discussed and negotiated. But we've seen a lot of more standardization, meaning the first 20 pages might be identical, and then they may change Exhibit A and Exhibit B, Exhibit A being your duties or your expectations for work, depending on how detailed that is. And then Exhibit B might be your compensation. So the only thing that would change from cardiology to surgery to hemonc to hospitalist might be the two exhibits. So we've seen more standardization across the board regarding contracts. Again, I don't think is a good thing or a bad thing. I think it's a thing. We saw for a while there a little trend into more part-time physicians and more job shares. We saw a couple people that were, two physicians were coming in to share a 1.0. We saw a lot of 0.6s and 0.8s for a while. We've kind of seen that go back to 1.0, but we see some come in. So we're seeing people review contracts much earlier. And I think it's okay if we timestamp this early February of 2024. And 6 months ago, we started reviewing a couple of 2026 agreements. And we've already got a lot of 2025 agreements in-house. So people are signing out 1.5 years before they're even signing, sometimes 2.5 years before they're even starting their position. The phones used to ring a lot in December, and we would get really busy with contracts January through April or May. And people would start working in July or August. And then we started getting really busy in December, and then it was November, and then it was October, and then September. And now we don't really have that much of a summer season. It was nice because, June, July, and August were fairly quiet around here, except for renewals and renegotiations. But the residents and fellows hadn't messaged us. And now we're seeing residents and fellows, message us 10, 11, 12, 15, 20 months before they're actually starting to sign their contracts. I don't know the exact reason. During the pandemic, we saw big hiring freezes in, March, April, May, and a little bit into June of 2020. And because of that, that class was delayed starting. And I don't know if people, because of that, are nervous about jobs or they're looking earlier. I don't know if there's a reason on the physician side. I do think that the employers are recruiting more aggressively further out. They're offering stipends because as they look at their business plan, they want to know, we've got enough primary care physicians. We have enough specialists. And I know you and everyone listening has seen the physician supply and demand curves, and they've read and heard about the shortage of physicians coming for years. And I think that's something that's real now, and it's going to get worse. And I think because of that, there's reasons that you're seeing physicians being offered jobs by employers well into the future as far as the current timeline goes. So that's another trend that we've seen. We saw student loans in the past and they kind of went away, and now they're coming back as far as physicians being offered student loan reimbursement. We saw quality bonuses. ACO payments were kind of a thing for a while, and now those have kind of fizzled out. And obviously everybody knows about the shift from private practice to more hospital employed or corporate employed. And we've seen a shift in that as well. But I think we're seeing a shift back in terms of more private practice offerings. But lots of stuff over the past 10 or 13 years, I'll tell you, it's been a fun ride. I'm excited to see what artificial intelligence does and everything else. I think it'll be really fun the next couple of years.
Yeah, especially with COVID, it has been a very interesting ride for sure for physicians and contract negotiators. What has it been like negotiating with private equity? Do you find that they give any?
And I hate to say it depends, but it depends. I think it matters on the physician's skill set and market. I think it matters, again, that's why I think it goes back to the story matters. So some organizations who look at contracts, they might take and redline the contract and then send it back to the physician. That's something that lawyers do. We don't do that here. We talk with people and we walk through, here's what's clear, here's what's not. We give them advice and guidance on what they could change. We don't just redline a contract and then send it back to them because the story is not incorporated in any particular redline. So I think, when it comes back to private equity question, are they more likely to change something? I think it depends on the story. And we get the story by talking to our clients. And then I think we can guide them on what they could and should ask for based on their particular story. I hate to say it's different, but it changes quite a bit. And the private equity people, they look at medicine a little bit differently. And, they might be less likely to lose a physician over 10 or 20 grand, where, a hospital system may say, look, we can't do that. There's no precedent, for example, a signing bonus of 40,000 versus 30,000. And the physician maybe says, I want 40,000 for a signing. And they say, all we could do is 30. And the physician says, I need 40. And the hospital, they might say, look, we can't do that because we said no to other people. And now there's discrepancy in pay and we don't want to, get in trouble, or we want to standardize things. So we say no. Again, losing a physician over 10,000 is not a good idea from any employer's perspective. Just recruiting somebody else is going to cost quite a bit more. And I think a private equity company is much more likely to see the value in $10,000 is a lot of money, but not a lot of money to secure this physician that's going to generate the revenue that they're going to generate over the years. So we're willing, as long as it's under fair market value cap, to invest in that physician and give them that extra 10,000 and make the deal work. So I think there's a little bit more flexibility there depending on the situation.
A lot of our listeners are women, so I want to ask you one last question. How do you negotiate women's issues such as childbearing and maternity and, breastfeeding time, all of that? How do you address that in contracts, and what do you advise young physicians?
I think it's a great question. Some of that would maybe be a contract language thing, and some of it would just be a verbal discussion thing with the employer. But again, I think it all comes back to what their story is. We ask, when we do the negotiations for the physicians, doesn't matter male or female, old or young, we always ask about family leave. What's the process? What's the policy for paternity or maternity leave? What's the short-term disability structure? What happens if somebody goes on leave, whether it's our client or whether it's one of their partners? What if it's a male colleague and somebody else goes out with a baby? How does that change their call burden? How does that change their location if they're picking up a satellite clinic from time to time? So I think it's much more of a holistic discussion other than just our physician client, but what's the process and the policy in the group and the historical handling of these situations. But yeah, that's something that we definitely are able to dig into. If the physician wants to work less than full time in the future, what that looks like, what things change, what is the policy for leave. Unfortunately, we don't see, paid family leave in physician contracts as much as we would in other spaces. My wife was an executive in real estate. She didn't sell homes, but she worked in a corporate office. She was the only female on the executive team. And I think she had 14 or 16 weeks of paid leave with full bonus and everything else. And unfortunately, that's common in the corporate world, but not so common in the physician space. And I wish it was different. Every time we're on with an employer and we're talking maternity, paternity leave, we always mention, this is something that you guys should revisit, because most of the time we hear the answer is no, we don't offer any paid leave. And we always inspire them to relook at their plan. And again, we tell them based on retention and recruitment and burnout and all these things that you say are important, this is what's important to some physicians these days. Of course, if we're able to negotiate more time off in a certain year, maybe they're on a draw and they don't want to go negative on their production. So if they're a dermatologist and they're getting 30 grand a month, if they all of a sudden don't produce anything for 3 months, do they have to make that lost up? And so there's some things that we could discuss and negotiate potentially into the contract. But it all depends on the situation. But I think those are all great questions that everybody should be thinking through. Whether this is going to be me in the future, I'm going to have a child, or my spouse is going to have a child, or what if my colleagues have a child? How does that impact me and my schedule and my compensation if and when they decide to do that? So I think it's something that everybody should definitely discuss.
Yeah, forward thinking and planning for that, and then making sure it's in our contracts in a way that we are comfortable with and can deal with going forward only helps retention, and also, reduces burnout and your overall happiness with your job, which is our goal here at the Frugal Physician. And I'm sure your goal at Contract Diagnostics to, help physicians be happier at their job. And that's really good for all of us. Are there any last words of wisdom you'd like to leave with our audience, Jon?
I would say, first off, I think every contract that a physician receives should be reviewed and should be questioned. Even if the facility says this is non-negotiable, we're not going to change anything, everyone signs the same thing. It's still important to know what your obligations are and how you can leave if you want to leave. Again, even if it's non-negotiable, what do you need to know? And sometimes a language with us or other services, I know a few $100s, you can have that peace of mind that you've had it looked at and you understand what the expectations are. I also think it's important to have really good questions for the due diligence. So again, if it's non-negotiable, it doesn't matter. You don't have to negotiate it, but there's still a lot of questions that you should ask. And even if I'm told, look, Jon, the contract's non-negotiable, and I'm doing a negotiation or a discussion for our physician, I can still talk to that recruiter or that executive or that administrator for an hour and a half. Without knowing that nothing's going to change, I can just ask him questions about this and a policy question about that. And how would this be handled? How is compensation revisited every other year? So The one thing I would say is even if it's non-negotiable, you should definitely still have it looked at. And join us for our educational content. If you don't want to have anything looked at, that's okay. But we have great educational content over here that we can help people for free. And I always remind everybody we started the company to help people, not to make money. And my presumption was if we helped enough people, then we'd be just fine on making money. And it's been a really fun time over the past 13 years. And we've helped a ton of people and we've made enough money along the way. So even if you don't want to have anything looked at, please join us for one of our free webinars or reach out to Dr. Catherine or myself or one of the other folks on our team to give a free educational talk to your program.
Where can they find you if they want to find your free talks and sign up for your services?
Easy. ContractDiagnostics.com. You can email info@contractdiagnostics.com. Our website, it's really cool. You can text back and forth with us. There's a person. It's not like one of those annoying bots that does the Q&A. You can have all of our packages, just text message right to your telephone. You can sign up online from a mobile device or any computer at work or anything. It's super simple. We have a 15-minute free inquiry call on our website. It's not a sales pitch. It's just an inquiry call. It's asking questions. Here's my situation. What do you think? Here's my story. Can you help? Here's my story. Do I need you? Those are things that we love to do, and anybody can set up a 15-minute call for free with somebody on our staff at any time. Or they can, of course, just call the 800 number, and it'll be answered by Jan. She's awesome. She's been with me for I don't know how many years, and she knows more about this industry and this company than I think probably anybody. So easy to get a hold of us, and whichever way is easy for them, a email, a text message, a phone call, a social media message, whatever, we're pretty much everywhere. It's easy to find us.
Well, thank you, Jon, for your time, and thank you for sharing your knowledge with us today. I hope you have a great day, and hopefully we'll see you back here soon.
Anytime. I love doing these. Thanks so much for the opportunity. It was fun to chat.
Thank you, Jon, for shedding light on the world of physician contracts and compensation. It's evident that Contract Diagnostics is making a significant impact in helping physicians navigate this crucial aspect of their careers. This was a sponsored episode by Contract Diagnostics, and we thank them for their support of the Frugal Physician. Jon has generously offered to answer your questions, so please, if you have any questions, email them to thefrugalphysician@gmail.com, and we'll get you an answer to your contract question directly from Jon. So please, if you have any questions, send them in, and we'll keep the conversation going. That concludes this episode of Finding Financial Freedom with the Frugal Physician. Remember, your story matters, and your contracts should reflect that. The happier you are at your job, the better it is for everyone around us, our patients, our families, and ourselves. So please take the time to make sure your contract reflects what you really want out of life and your job. If you found this episode informative, please subscribe, rate, and review our podcast. Stay tuned for more episodes where we continue to explore ways to empower you in your medical journey towards financial freedom. See you later, and stay frugal, y'all. Now, a final word from our sponsor. At Pearson Rabbits, they understand that life can change in an instant. It's hard to imagine that a sudden illness, injury, or catastrophic event could put you and your family in a devastating financial situation. Physician-founded and physician-focused, Pearson Rabbits builds human connections before they create quotes. Visit www.pearsonrabbits.com today and embark on your journey to safeguarding your future.
The content shared on this podcast should not be taken as individualized financial advice. We are here to share our knowledge and experiences, but it is crucial to consult with professionals such as accountants, financial advisors, or attorneys who can provide personalized guidance based on your specific needs.